Today we're going to be talking about obstacles. You know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this consumption society that we live in. The blind spots that every one of us is carrying around. The false assumptions or that poverty mindset that maybe you brought up from your childhood and your family. And then the failure to plan. Listen today and we're going to cover it all.
It's Brian Preston, the money guy, restoring order to your financial chaos, retirement, investing, taxes. You've got financial questions. He's got financial answers. It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
But let's talk about where this show is coming from.
Okay.
Because what we're going to be talking about today is don't let these obstacles ruin your financial independence.
Okay.
I constantly give this analogy. I talk about how planning for financial independence is no different than your preparation for a marathon. And the fact that a marathon, as we know, it takes tons of preparation and planning. It requires a long-term mindset. And then lastly, you've got to be disciplined.
So I want to make sure I understand. You said where the show came from was that. So are you letting us know, Brian, that right now you're training for a marathon?
No, God, no. Fortunately, we have video now, so there's not even a jury that has to be out. It is known that that I am not the athletic specimen that's training for a marathon. I'm surprised it's not on your bucket list. I mean, you are the one when clients come visit us in Franklin, they go, which sport did you play? And I'm like, what? They didn't ask me that. But in all seriousness, here's what I mean by that is that I was thinking about that analogy, but then it hit me. I was like, that analogy is right, but it's missing some elements. And what it's missing is that it doesn't tell the full story. And I don't mean to scare you on your journey towards financial independence, but it's bigger than working on a marathon and the fact that there's obstacles that come out and attack you during this process. If you think about, and I'm going to give this analogy later, but when you're running a marathon or training for it, the course is pretty clear. Mm-hmm. And the best times are usually given when you're on flat surface.
Right.
And you're in a cool, super humid environment. And these are all the things that go into it. Well, we all know that's not how your financial life works out. There's going to be things and this came about because I was watching TV and it starts at a young age. My youngest daughter, watches all these kids channels, Disney Channel, Nickelodeon, and all that stuff. And it's not surprising that there's constantly commercials. It's gotten to the point where she will pause the DVR and then bring me and my wife into the room and say, "Dad, check this out." And we're like,
hold on, she paused it on the commercial?
No, yeah. And can I get this for my birthday or for Christmas or something?
Awesome.
And you're like, this consumption society starts at a young age. So it's no wonder that this is one of the obstacles that we're facing. And then I think about even my own youth and my childhood coming from, I don't come from wealth. I come from, I guess, middle to lower middle class. Mm-hmm. And I always told that rich people either inherited their money or they did something inappropriate to probably enrich themselves. So there's this poverty, and I call that's definitely a poverty mindset. When you are saying the reason you are not ahead is because of somebody else's, getting something ahead of you. That is a poverty mindset that and those false assumptions can definitely be an obstacle to you reaching success. Blind spots. I mean, every one of us, has blind spots.
Sure.
You don't realize there's things in your life, especially in your financial life, that you don't even realize there's a set of skills that you're missing or not maximizing. I'm going to tell you a personal story on that I think that will hopefully connect as well. And then lastly, which is probably the biggest one, is the failure to plan. So all these obstacles are things that I want to cover today and help you figure out what's the solution. How do you move past these things so that you are basically blazing a trail, that even though that there are obstacles and that this is a long-term process, you're going to come out and essentially medal. You'll be on the podium from doing such a great job. But before I get into the actual specifics, let's remind you who we are. This is the Money Guy Show. I'm your host, Brian Preston. I got Bo Hansen across the way from me here. We've been doing this since 2006. That's right, January 2006. So that makes us, we're quickly approaching our 12th, I guess, a dozen years of doing this. We are fee-only wealth managers by day. I carry the Certified Public Accountant, Certified Financial Planner, and the Personal Financial Specialist designations. Bo is a Certified Financial Planner and a Chartered Financial Analyst. That was somehow he pulled that off a week before he got married. So that was a few years ago. So be impressed by that. But go check us out, moneyguy.com. We do have clients in 38 states, and that number is growing steadily. We'd love for you to join our map. Go to the website. Go to moneyguy.com or go to aboundwealth.com. Check out the maps that we have out there, and then hit the contact page if you'd like to take the relationship to the next level.
If you haven't listened for a while and you're somebody who tunes in via Stitcher or iTunes or iHeartRadio, and you just want to know what this thing looks like, or even what we look like, or how we kind of banter back and forth, we've officially started video. Is it okay to say that now?
No, for sure. And by the way, the numbers are great. Thank you. You guys know this is always a humbling experience. If you've wondered, because a few of you guys have asked, why don't y'all do like conferences or come travel and set up things with your fans and your listeners? The reason, a lot of it is fear.
Yeah.
I mean, because anything we do, we wonder and it's rightfully so, because the first 3 years we did this podcast, I felt like I was screaming into a void, because you don't know who's listening. You're doing it off the passion, because this is a passion project. So it's one of those things where you think every time I take a step further, whether it's adding video, will people show up?
Right.
Will this work? And then when you guys show up in force, I got to tell you, it's humbling, but it's also extremely exciting, and it encourages us to take the next step. So thank you for all the reviews. Thank you for those that are going out there and actually looking at the YouTube and saying that this is great. It makes us feel tremendous about taking these chances and trying to push this thing on. Because as we've shared in other podcasts too, this is a mom and pop shop. There is no big corporation behind this company. Now, we have grown into a nice sized firm.
Sure.
But this is not some Fortune 500 company is sitting behind us and pushing the budget and everything else. This is what you get. You guys are a huge, tremendous part of our success. So check it out, moneyguy.com. I'd also be remiss. We're recording this on a Tuesday.
Right.
It's actually my 19th wedding anniversary. I'm worried that I'll probably get a negative review on that, because you'll see if you go look at our iTunes reviews that some trolls have in the past picked on us for making too many positive comments about attractive wives and other things. But I think it's an important thing to share. And then my wife is so happy to celebrate with me that I'm leaving town first thing in the morning. Actually, at 3:30 this morning,
That's right,
we're headed to the airport to fly out to the podcast movement. And I think I put like an old man.
Yeah, you did. It's all
we're headed to podcast movement out in Anaheim. So, some of you guys hopefully will hear this while we're wrapping up the podcast and go, I wish I'd have known they were going to be there. So maybe we'll put something out on Twitter to let people know we are going to be in town. So that's enough setup. Let's get into the meat of this thing. The first area I wanted to go into was really the failure to plan the when and how much scenarios, because a lot of the things, your big financial goals in life, especially when you're building financial independence, is when do I want to do that?
Yeah.
And well, if I got the when, how much is that going to cost? These are all the questions that will approach you. And then you're trying to figure out, well, am I doing any homework or research to figure out those answers? Or is that just a daydream that's kind of just sitting out there in the background, but there's not actually any traction occurring to help me do this? And that started making me think about, in your life, and it goes quick, guys, and I get all sentimental and sappy because I'm post 40, but it goes so quick. And I think the average person, based upon, statistics on planning and preparation, most people are treating life like they're the supporting character
right.
in this episode of life. When the reality is you are the A-list celebrity actor that is involved in this story. So by all means, start acting like you're the star. And let's put together a plan. Let's figure out how this is all going to work through some type of vision plan. And this will also help you get out of your head on these false assumptions, this poverty mindset that I was talking about. Because I think so many of you guys get caught up in thinking, well, I can't do that. Brian, come on. Being wealthy? That's not for me. And right. Remember what motivated this entire movement of me even getting into the financial field, because I didn't know anything about stock market. I didn't know anything about investing. I didn't know anything about budgeting when I was sitting in high school and in college, until the point that I had a high school economics teacher. We all know that he's also the wrestling coach, and it was one of those things. He's every stereotype, but right. He did say that key thing. He said, if you want to be a millionaire, every one of you in this room could do it if you could just save $100 a month.
Sure.
And as the crew leader at Hardee's at the time, I was like, I could save $100 a month. And it's true. I mean, it was actually, we've done the math, Bo. The number was actually lower than $100.
Right,
if you start saving in high school, it's in the $70s, $80 a month range. If you wait until you're 22, it's really $100 a month if you have the right assumptions built into it. So get out of that poverty mindset and realize you can do this. This is not something that you need to be scared of or think or have some jealousy that you're not going to have the opportunities everybody else has. And this is also another thing. I had a meeting last week with a podcast listener who's also a client, and they'll listen to this and probably get some enjoyment that I'm repeating something that we talked about, is they're very successful. And one of the things that I thought was interesting is we were kind of talking about, and this is a common trend I noticed with a lot of my clients, is that they were talking about how wealth kind of snuck up on them. You don't realize until one day you look at your net worth statement, because hopefully you're tracking those every year. We've told you many, many times, start doing annual net worth statements. But you're going to wake up one day and you're going to look down at that annual net worth statement and you go, holy cow.
How did we get here?
How did we get here?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to get quiet and look around and go, it snuck up on me, that son of a gun. And it's true. I mean, it really is one of those things where it is, and that's why it's back to that marathon analogy with the, obstacle course of financial life that you have to overcome these things. But it is one of those many small steps that over time builds up until you have the culmination of a financial life well lived. So pay attention to all the different things, and let's actually put foot to ground on what are some implementation things you can do to help you get past these when and how much scenarios.
Yeah, and what I think is so interesting is that you talk about working through that. It's a process where you kind of have to mature in your understanding. I've heard you say this 1,000 times before, Brian, but when you were a young child, you always said that you did go-kart math, right?
Yeah.
You kind of had an idea of how much your, dad made a year, and you knew how much a go-kart was. And so by that math, he could go buy you 200 go-karts, right? Or something
I think you give my dad way too much credit. He was a great man, but I think at the time, go-karts were $500. I think I gave him credit that he could probably buy me, 60, 70 go-karts.
Okay, there we go. Okay, maybe not 200 go-karts.
Not 200.
But either way, it's pretty simple math, and you had to kind of come to this understanding that you had to mature in the way that you thought about approaching those financial decisions. Well, reaching goals is the same way. In terms of planning for retirement, you do have to think about what are you doing today to begin getting that plan in place for tomorrow.
Yeah, we've done entire podcasts, but I think it's important in this one, even though it is very much talking about 30,000 foot planning. Let's give you some actual implement goals or benchmarks that you can use to kind of evaluate yourself. If you are thinking specifically about retirement and you want to know, do I have enough money? One of the easiest ways. We've done an entire podcast series on this, but take what you think you'll need for living expenses. And if it's way in the future, you're going to need to grow it for some inflation factor. But let's keep it simple and just assume you know what your living expenses are. Multiply by 25.
Sure.
And see what that number is, and then see how far you are and what it's going to take to reach that number and get realistic. Those are some baseline just planning assumptions. And that's built upon the back of the 4% withdrawal rate. If you think about it, you have 100% divided by, if you're doing a 4% withdrawal rate, you divide by 4, that's 25 years is what that is. So that's how the math works. If you're a little more optimistic about life, maybe you just multiply it by 20, but I like it. It's somewhere in between that 20 to 25 multiply factor is going to help you on figuring out a good baseline for what you might need in retirement. Just don't underestimate the value of inflation, because that could have a play. Because I know a lot of you guys are in the FIRE movement where you're planning on retiring very, very early. The only thing I would caution you on that is that obviously $50,000 a day is not going to be $50,000 15, 20 years from now.
Sure.
So just make sure you're not letting that inflation factor kind of cause you to have a blind spot in that area of your life.
So what are some of the things that we can do, Brian, if we want to plan for the when and the how much? What are some things we can start doing now and start thinking about now to move in that direction?
Well, I mean, the big thing is you got to put it on paper. I mean, how many times I've mentioned it, plans of action do not occur until they're actually recorded. Mm-hmm. And here's the cool thing, and this is also kind of that mystical pixie dust part of the equation, is every time, and this is not just your personal life, this is in my business life as well, when I record goals and then I actually state on paper what I think I want the next step to be, it's somehow, even though I can't tell you physical action I've taken in all aspects of my life, it starts moving towards it. I think there's something psychological and going on in your background of your brain that helps you work towards those goals. And that's why I think as a group, humans like to record their goals. So that's the first thing, is make sure it's documented and make sure that you actually have turned this daydream into something that is a recorded goal.
And so when I write that down, Brian, do I just need to say, okay, well, my financial goal is one day I want to retire and I want to be rich, and I write that down on a sheet of paper and I'm moving that direction. Is that what you're talking about?
It has no meat. You got to have some details to it. And that's why I think it's perfect when we set this up, when we put the header up there. When and how much. That's the key components. You got to tell what year is this going to occur? What's the deadline for this goal? And then how much, is that number, so I can use my nerdy little financial calculator or doing a Google search to come up with a time, a time weighted and, present value calculation of what I need to be doing on my money right now to be effective. Moving on from the how much and when scenarios, I want to talk to you about being horrible with your cash flow discipline, because after you get past, and I think this is probably where you were trying to lead me to, giving me some breadcrumbs, Bo, but I don't pick up on it always, is that after you record that measurable goal of the when and how much, you now need to start thinking about what's the steps. I mean, really where we are. And the first thing I want to tell you about this is that this is where that consumption society comes in. This is where, like, we're conditioned from a young age, like my youngest daughter is, where you start getting all these commercials, where you start seeing all the nice cars. I mean, you start seeing the big houses. You see all the things. But by the way, none of that is saying that there's anything wrong with nice cars, nice houses, and all that. I'm just saying you have to know where they fit into your life and make sure you prioritize your goals appropriately so you're not doing things out of whack. Because here's the thing that troubles me about sometimes setting up things in this crazy consumption society. I see people graduate, and I'm looking towards my doctors and others who come from being, out of school for a while. They go through their residency where they're still not making any money, and then all of a sudden, hey, they're making great money, but they have tremendous student loan debt, but that great income makes them susceptible to where people say, hey, you've got a great income. You ought to go buy this nice car, go buy this nice house. The problem is you haven't filled the base of your financial planning pyramid yet and made sure that you got the cash reserves, that you got a retirement plan started, that you've got, all the basics covered before you start thinking higher up on that financial planning pyramid of goals like cars and houses and things like that. So let's kind of go through some of the steps required. The first one I put on here was create a budget. Now, this is going to surprise some of you because I've had some podcasts recently, and I have a friend out there in the podcast world who listens to our shows, and I see him post things on social media, and I'm like, is he talking about me? Did I disappoint him in some way? Because I have let people know on this podcast in the past, I don't budget. I don't like budgets. Budgets, they just don't fit me well, but I think I might need to give clarification by what I mean on a budget. First of all, budgets are necessary, I think, when people are doing their initial steps towards financial independence. If you're one of those people, it's Bo, you were a baseball player.
Yep.
Not to ruin it for everybody when you come visit and you have to ask him what sport he did. But it's, you don't learn, there's drills and all kind of things you had to do when you first learned to hit or you throw. But then after you've done it for 15, 20, 30 years, you don't have to think
That's
things anymore, is it?
It becomes second nature. It's you kind of
even
have
like
it now.
muscle memory.
That's right.
Your body gets used to doing things. A good golf swing is very similar. I mean, I have people I've played golf with who they can take some time off and then go out there and still do great because their muscle memory and their skill level with certain things works out so well.
Sure.
So I think if you are struggling and you're a brand new person to getting your foundation of financial independence and want to start on the path, create a budget. There's no doubt that you ought to create a spending journal and know what's going on. And there's all kind of tools you can use there's apps on your phone. There's all kind of things that have automated this. So it's not just physically you walking around with a pencil and paper.
That's what I was going to say, Brian. What I love about this sort of step one is that there's no right or wrong answer on how to do it. A lot of folks want to have envelopes that they keep in a drawer with something written on there, and a certain amount goes in there every month. Or some people want to use a software like a mint.com, or some people just like an old-fashioned spreadsheet. There's no right or wrong way to start establishing a budget, but the important piece is to start establishing it, because it's hard to know where your money should be going unless you know where it already is going. So it requires some tracking.
And this leads to my next step. And this is the point of clarification I wanted to make for my friend in the podcasting world, that hopefully now when I go on Twitter, I'll be like, okay, I haven't disappointed him anymore. And I'll show you some of the tweets and other things, Bo, after the show, so you'll see what I'm talking about. But I want you to graduate from budgeting to creating a true cash flow plan. And that's where I am in life. Is I've graduated from budgeting. It's known how to handle my money and get the basics covered. But now I have what's a cash flow and a cash management plan. And I primarily do that through a system of forced scarcity. And you guys know we do podcast on forced scarcity. That is something I talk about constantly. And if you want to know what that means, forced scarcity is the concept that you on purpose, no matter how successful, no matter how big your cash flow is, you go ahead and pay yourself first by putting buckets together for that money to disappear before you even know it's there. And I mean, I'm talking about everything. I mean, you're funding cash reserves automatically. You're funding your retirement plan automatically. You're funding the kids' college education. You're going ahead, and that money just magically is just disappearing. And I know I've done it right when I will tell you, probably 3 out of 4 months, I have to go pull money out of savings and put it back into my checking account to pay bills. And you're like, Brian, that sounds ridiculous. And I'm like, no, I feel poor, but that's the purpose.
Yeah,
I feel poor while I'm getting rich in the background. And I would say, if you're doing this right, no pain, no gain. I mean, it really is. If you're not cutting close enough to the bone where you are having to go back and fill up go pull some money from savings. And that's one of the things that's great about doing this forced scarcity. You will have savings to go pull from, is because those other 9 to 10 months, you were able to really fill it up. And now there are months, and a few of you, we have clients that do this, where all of a sudden the checking account has a lot more money in it. And you go, well, wait a minute. If you have those type of situations where your checking account is filling up, then you need to go and stretch out those success moments and probably increase that forced scarcity in your life. Go increase what's going in, and that's what, Bo, I know you've talked about it. You're in that stage in your life where you got a lot of life things going on. You got babies at the house, but yet you're also funding things. I mean, how do you deal with trying to set stretch goals and also just making this all work with the forced scarcity?
Yeah. So what I do personally, and then I also encourage all of my clients who are in a similar situation. If you're someone who has some variable income where it varies either quarter to quarter or month to month, I try to think about how I adjust my forced scarcity almost on a monthly basis. So if I know that income's going to be up because of a certain thing that's happening or a certain transaction that takes place, I do make sure that I adjust those pots up. So in the high school wrestling coach example of saving $100 a month, that's a great place to start. But you graduate to a point to where you can do a little more than $100 a month, and you have to keep yourself accountable that you are doing it. One question I have for you, Brian, is you said that, you have all this forced scarcity going on. You set up these like stretch success moments. Have you found that when you do that sort of stuff, you start to feel a lot less guilty about spending money on things like maybe upgrading your automobile or going on a family trip or buying that new iPhone or whatever the case may be? Do you feel like you can kind of let some of the stress of that go because you know that you are filling up the buckets right?
Without a doubt. I mean, this is one of the biggest benefits that you get from structuring a pay yourself first through forced scarcity mentality, is because I think there's a lot of guilt. And this is what I tell people: get out of the poverty mindset. There's nothing wrong with success, but there is this feeling for savers, and they're going to discover a DNA gene that shows, because there's, we all have stories of why am I so different from everybody else in my family that I love saving, that they're going to find that there's a savers gene. But part of a problem, and I guess the side effects of having this savers gene, is that you feel tremendous guilt for not putting money to work. It's that whole balancing act of being a financial miser or being somebody who's really good with money. We have a podcast on that. Go do a search on financial miser. But it is one of those things where if you pay yourself first, that money that's left over, it's yours. And I first remember when I saw this concept, it was reading The Wealthy Barber. If you guys haven't read that, reads like a narrative book. It's actually one of the first books I usually recommend when people come to me with college students and say, what should I get my kids to read to really get them excited about saving for the future? The Wealthy Barber is a great baseline book because it's written like a narrative storybook. It's about a barber in the community who giving great advice to people at different stages of their life. And then you can transition to The Millionaire Next Door and other things. But it all goes back to the basic understanding is that it is good to have your money allocated in a way so that you can then feel free to spend what is left and know that there's no guilt because you didn't check the box already on everything else.
And another side benefit of doing this is if you do this, because we all know that one of the things that most often happens inside of intimate relationships is infighting about finances. One of the things that's beautiful from a couple standpoint or from like a marriage counseling standpoint is if you do know the forced scarcity is already happening and those boxes are being checked, you don't have to then fight or argue or squabble over what you're spending money on because it's sort of allowed and accounted for.
Bo, before we move on from this subject, what's the guidelines we tell people on how to allocate money? Because a lot of people are saying, this is great. I'm feeling inspired. I'm getting motivated. But how much should I be saving? What's the actual, you've told me where the goal is of 20 to 25 times multiplier of my living expenses, but how much should I be saving of my cash flow?
Sure. So here's a really nice rule of thumb. Take whatever you make as a household right now, your total gross income, and you should be saving 15 to 20% of that for the future. Now, when we say for the future, in our opinion, that's building towards things like financial independence, building towards retirement. If you have a secondary goal, like maybe you want to buy a new car or go on a trip, those are other short intermediate term goals. But in terms of building financial independence, your goal should be 15 to 20% of your gross income. If you want to be a hyper saver, you're somebody who falls into that, financial independence, retire early movement, maybe you even try to stretch that to 25%. If you're doing that and checking those boxes, then it's okay to start funding some of those other things like, improving the car or thinking about saving for a down payment for a new home or going on that trip or even prepaying debt. If you're someone who just doesn't want to have any debt, once you've checked that saving for the future box, you can easily go start tackling that home debt and that sort of thing.
But let me ask you this. Do you get to count? Because I think there's a lot of people when you say save, they get confused between saving like a savings account, like a joint account or an individual account versus a retirement account.
Sure.
Do you get to count your 401k, your 403bs,
Absolutely.
your Roth IRAs? What goes into that 15 to 20% number?
Absolutely. Anything that you're building up that's going to continue to grow for the future. So that would be like your employer-sponsored retirement plan, whether that's a 401k or a 403b or a simple IRA. Also your Roth IRAs, if you're building up assets there. Any of those accounts that are continuing to grow for the future. And here's something you can do. Your employer match, it does count in the number, but if you really want to stay on the conservative side and really want to kind of hypercharge it, don't even think about what your employer's doing. Because if you have a 3-4% match from your employer and you're already hitting that 20% number, when you add that gravy on top, you're saving 23-24% of your total income. It's pretty remarkable and it'll grow quickly.
Yeah, that can be a tremendous sweetener to helping you reach those financial goals that much quicker. So, here's one that's going to be kind of contrary to what we hear about is friends and family and the stress that comes from friends and family. Yeah. Now, I want to set up a visual for you guys. Think about that whole marathon analogy again. And I've already kind of talked about this, but we have open, most marathons are set up where they have everything roped off. And you have people who are right on the sidelines who are clapping and all cheering. And, even we're here in the Music City, so it's not uncommon that when they have the marathon here in the Music City, they'll have bands set up.
Sure, yeah.
But the runner still has free and clear of the track. Right. The race area is free and clear, and their goal is to get to the finish line. What if every so often you had family members that ran out on the middle of the track and tackled their loved one and held them down and hugged them and kissed them and said, I'm so proud of you. You're doing great. Or, hey, I need. And, you probably wouldn't see as much success in the marathon process if it was the obstacle of avoiding your friends and family as they came and tackled you on the course. But that is exactly what happens when you're saving for retirement. It is one of the key obstacles out there is that we all have stories. Remember I've told you we have this saving gene that they're going to discover, that they're going to figure out something to do. The problem, I guess a side effect I would say, maybe this is like a public service announcement. We're doing a lot of medical where I'm talking about side effects, but a side effect to being the one with the saver's gene in your family is that you probably have family members that aren't making good financial decisions.
Right.
They are not the ones who are making the decisions that are setting them up for the future, but they look at you and they go, hey, they're doing all right.
Right.
Maybe they can help me out.
Yeah.
And that's not uncommon. I mean, because you see it all the time. We see it with adults, with their children, helping them make decisions. We see it with all types of relatives where people are going out there and helping their family members and to the detriment of their financial life. And that's the key point, because I don't want everybody to go, you're at Thanksgiving and you go, I'd love to help you guys out, but I was listening to this podcast by this guy named Brian Preston who said, you know what, family, you're on your own. That is not what we're saying. I think there is something wonderful about being generous with your assets, as long as you know where you are in your funding of your baseline goals yourself. Be generous with your assets, but don't do it as a detriment to your financial success. But when we go speak at 401k meetings and so forth, you give an analogy of that flight attendant on the plane.
Sure.
Walk us through that analogy.
Yeah, when you get on a plane and the flight attendant gets up there and they start doing their sort of dog and pony, showing you all the safety stuff, the first thing they always tell you is that if the oxygen masks come down, make sure you put yours on before you start helping someone else. Basically, what they're saying is you have to make sure that you are secure and you have a foundation established before you can start assisting others. Your financial life really isn't a whole lot different than that. You have to make sure that you're doing the baseline before you can start being generous and kind of extending that help to others.
So let's talk about how this actually gets implemented. Because when we're talking about family and friends and them potentially derailing you and being an obstacle to your financial independence, let's talk about cosigning. Bo, do you cosign?
Well,
put you in the hot seat.
In my opinion, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think that cosigning makes a ton of sense because there are ways for young people to begin establishing credit, for them to be able to start building that up. Most often when you see someone cosign, it's for someone who has no credit at all, and so they feel, it's justified. Well, okay, they should start taking some steps to start establishing that. If you're cosigning for someone who's maybe made some really bad financial decisions previously, might be some red flags there, because what you're essentially doing when you cosign on a loan, you're not really serving as a backup. You're getting right there next to them. You are right in line next to them when it comes to having to pay that obligation.
What I don't like about cosigning is that you are essentially going ahead and arming a financial grenade for your future. Because here's the way these things play out, guys, from experience, is that when you provide or co-sign on a loan, it's exactly what Bo said. You are sitting next to that person. You're not just the backup. You are basically guaranteeing that you will come in to bail this thing out if something bad goes wrong. The problem is the person who's the primary on it, usually when things go bad, they don't call you and say, guess what? I missed payments for the last 3 months. Right. What's going to end up happening is that you go apply for, maybe you need to refinance your house, or you have some big thing that's coming, and you run your credit, or the lender runs a credit report on you, or you go just renew your homeowner's insurance or your auto insurance, where they pull your credit report and they go, man, your credit is horrible. You're like, what are you talking about? I'm one of the most responsible people in the world with my credit. I take it very serious. I pay my bills. I almost gave a Game of Thrones reference there, but I pay my bills. And the thing is that no, you got stuck because you co-signed, because that person you co-signed left you a nice armed grenade. You actually put the pin in there for them, handed it to them, and said, when you want to, blow this thing up whenever you, because that's the way this thing plays out, and that's why it is such a horrible reason to co-sign on a loan, is because at some point in the future, you run a good chance of being disappointed. And that leads to the next thing. I do want you to be generous with your family members. If you're one of the people who has the saver's gene, and you're one of the more successful people in your family, I think it's okay after you've funded your cash reserves, after you've got yourself on a path of funding retirement and then even taking care of the kids' education. If you want to be generous with your family members, it's fine, especially in their moments of need. But realize anything and everything that you lend to family members, you should not do more than you plan on losing. Mm-hmm. Anytime I've ever done personal loans, and it ouches. I mean, it hurts when somebody's not paying you back like you thought they would. But you just have to know when you do it, you might not get paid.
Sure.
I mean, I would not lend or give more than you can just afford to lose without derailing the financial plan.
Yep.
So, I want to talk about blind spots and not taking inventory of your personal skill set. Every one of us is doing something better than most. I mean, I think it's one of those things and that's what's so important. I'm working on a future podcast right now of great advice to give kids, especially 14-year-olds. I have one. She turned 14 last week. So I'm trying to do a podcast series on how do you make good financial knowledge? What would you wish somebody had shared with you when you were 14 years old? And one of the things is that I put in there, one of the first things is you got to take an inventory of what you're good at.
Okay.
You got to figure out very quickly what you do better than the majority of the population. So that can give you so many indicators for your career, for your finances. There's a lot of value to taking a skill set. And once again, it all comes back to that human nature thing of where you've got to record things on paper, so that you know where you stand with things. But it's also going to show you where your blind spots are. You know, there are people, and I want to tell you a personal story, who are great with saving money. And what do you think is that one of the hardest things of indicators of success is just being disciplined to save?
Yeah, for sure. Deferred gratification is probably the single hardest part of building financial independence.
It's not figuring out which mutual fund to buy. The hardest skill set, and a lot of people actually have this already ingrained in them where they can save and be disciplined and save. But they're great at earning money, but they just don't know how to maximize the resources and help them invest. And that's the story. I've shared this on podcasts. I've had other blogs. People have blogged about this when I've talked about it, but it's the truth. And I think you learn best from stories sometimes, and personal stories especially. My father and my mother were great savers. I mean, you don't come up with Tightwad Nation and all these other things I've shared about with my mom recycling soap and all this other stuff unless your parents are just great at gleaming as much money, just pulling out as much money as possible from their finances. I get that naturally because I think my parents made a great example of that. Where they might have been a little off is that their idea of investing was in CDs, because they just didn't, my parents were unsophisticated, they were great at saving, but didn't know, if I'd have mentioned the stock market or a mutual fund, they would have looked at you and go, what is that? Yeah. My dad would actually probably recounted a story where somebody cold called him and sold him some penny hoggity stock, that of course didn't do well because that's not the appropriate way to do it. But that's the only experience he had. So he's like, well, I never lost money in a CD. That is a false assumption. You have lost money in a CD because your buying power is being undermined every year as inflation continues to increase on its march of things getting more and more expensive, and you've invested in that CD. They're not paying you a lot on those CDs. I guarantee you right now we could talk about cost of living, talk about inflation. Your CD that's probably paying you 1.5%. Is that keeping up? And that's something you have to be very mindful of, is your purchasing power is being undermined with those type of items. So I had a father and a mother great with saving. And then I have a father-in-law. And I think they were good with saving money too, but I don't know if they squeezed as hard, and I know they were not recycling soap. I mean, you have to be way up on the tightwad scale to be recycling soap slivers so you can melt them down and then make new soap.
It still grosses me out.
That's the type of crazy stuff that was going on in the Preston household. But my father-in-law, he started buying the Fidelity Magellan Fund back when Fidelity Magellan Fund was just setting all kind of, you don't even have to do much. I think it was something very reasonable. Just a few $100s a month was going into the Fidelity Magellan Fund. It grew into a large or decent. I don't want to say large because my father-in-law they're not Daddy Warbucks, but it was much bigger. It was probably a multiple of 3 to 4 times what my parents had because they were investing in a better product. It was something that was keeping pace and actually outpacing inflation, and they let their money work for them. Instead of them working with their hands, their backs, and their brains, the money, the army of dollar bills, got very active and got excited and then went out there and multiplied and just grew and was prosperous. These are the things that you have to recognize. Do you have a blind spot that's keeping you from making the best financial decisions? I give you that example is that my father would have been much more successful if they'd have hired somebody. If they could have found Brian Preston, Bo Hansen, when they first started this whole skill set of saving and deferring gratification, I think the sky's the limit.
And so you're saying that even though some of us were so hardwired to be so tight, we're so hardwired to be so cost conscious that sometimes if we recognize where we do have a deficiency in our skill set, even though it might cost us money to get outside help there, it may very well be warranted to do so.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's Bo, I just got an invoice and paid for my brand because I moved to the state of Tennessee not too long ago. So I had to redo all the estate documents, all the trust and everything else. And, bill came through. It hurts to write that big of a bill and a check for that. But here's the thing. I know there's experts that are above and beyond. And so I have no trouble hiring people when I have a blind spot or I have a weakness or I have a skill set that I have not figured out how to maximize and I don't have the hours in the day to go maximize and figure it out. Go hire somebody to fill in those voids so that you can get back to doing what you're passionate about, doing what you're good at. And that's the big part is just knowing where your limitations, because we see people all the time, and you talk about who hires a financial planner, because this is one of those things where it does work. We see people who have the aptitude and the ability to do what we do for a living, but they just don't have the hours in the day. They're so successful at their day jobs. Yeah, we're kind of that backup plan in case something happens to them, or we're that backup plan so that nothing's slipping through the cracks, because I think you guys can sense we are this nerdy. I mean, and that's one of the things is that you want to have somebody that you align with. And it's not just financial planning. We could be talking about all kind of different skill sets that you want to hire somebody. I mean, I cut my own grass. I'm going to continue to cut my own grass, but there is a difference from a person who does it professionally. So if I was somehow being graded on my grass cutting, I might need to go bring a professional in.
You do your own landscaping too, like weeds and beds and all that stuff?
Oh, you come to my house and you can see right now. Yeah, you can tell I do it myself. I keep telling myself, I'm going to go around with that 5-gallon Home Depot bucket and start picking weeds with the kids because it'd be a great family learning experience.
Oh, your girls would love that.
But the problem is, it's like 96 degrees when the humidity makes you just drip in sweat as soon as you walk outdoors. I'm like, nobody's picking weeds today. So the weeds are out there just having they're having a party. And it's an unbridled party in my flower beds right now, but we're going to get that fixed at some point.
Weed party over the Preston household. There's the headline.
So these are the things that I want to bring it back as we're closing out the podcast today. I think there are so many teachable nuggets in today's show. And I think the only thing I worry about, and we'll just keep it on the same theme we've been doing. If I could say the side effect of doing a podcast where we threw so much at you is that you're probably looking at this and going, how do I get all that done? But too much. Realize, guys, you eat that elephant one bite at a time.
That's right.
And it's all back to the marathon too. You don't start off running 26.2 miles. You start off running a 5K. Uh-huh. Or in my case, you just try to make it a half a mile, without stopping.
Run the mailbox.
Make it that mailbox. That's exactly right. That's when I've run with my wife in the past. I'm like, ooh, God, 2 more mailboxes and I'm stopping. And then you just try to keep tricking yourself with these mental games. But you are your own worst enemy. There are so many things. And Bo, I always like letting you do the quick summary. Can you give us a quick recap of some of the key concepts we kind of covered today?
Sure. Yeah. The first thing you really need to keep track of is that failing to plan is planning to fail. That was from my mom. She used to always say that to me. It used to drive me crazy. But I know I'm going to say it to my kids. Right?
Oh, for sure.
So that's the first one. You have to have a plan in place. You have to have a strategy for how you are going to do the things that you want to do. From the financial aspect, you have to figure out how to be disciplined with your cash flow. First, you have to know where your money is going, and then you have to know where it should be going. Then you have to do things like implementing forced scarcity or stretching out success moments so that you do have the money flowing into the right pots. And then once you've done those things, you need to make sure you avoid or put notice out there to folks who might want to derail you, like friends and family who might want to leverage your good financial decision making. So you have to be aware of that and reticent of that. And then the final thing is that you have to have an inventory of your skill set. What do you do well? Continue doing that. What can you do better? Maybe it makes sense to get some help with those things.
Yeah, and not all this has to be accomplished at once. Just figure out how you can start honing in what are the obstacles that are keeping you from becoming the best version of yourself. Now, I'm not talking about just financially, just personally and everywhere else in your life. Start figuring out what those obstacles are. Go ahead and start setting those goals and then get to work on creating a plan. Remember, it doesn't happen until you start recording these goals. And then before you know it, you go look around and you go, how did you sneak up on me, Mr. Wealth? I mean, and that's really the way wealth will sneak up on you if you just take these steps. This stuff works, guys. I'm telling you, We are living, breathing proof, and we deal with clients all the time where they wake up one day and they are reaching their goals. It is one of the most exciting and incredible things that we get. And that's why I love my job. It is truly fulfilling to learn from people who are just awesome at what they do and have figured out how to maximize growing and making the best of their resources. And then we get to share that with all of our clients. And it is just fulfilling to watch people reach goals. It makes the hair rise on my arm when I think about those type of things. So if you like what you hear, you've been listening to this, we have people who tell us all the time, I've been listening from the beginning. So if you're crazy enough, you've been listening for a dozen years and you want to take the relationship to the next level, reach out to us. Go to moneyguy.com, go to aboundwealth.com. You can research us a little bit more. You can also, maybe you're not ready, but at least go to the Money Guy website, sign up for our newsletter, go out to YouTube, check out some of the incredible stuff we're trying to do on all the social media platforms because we want to connect. We want to be part of your life. And what I like about this full circle experiment, this really was a passion project, is we have found that the more generous we are with you, the more successful we can make you by just giving it away. I have people at conferences approach me all the time. I'm doing a round table in Boston in about a month and a half, and I think they're going to pick my brain and be like, do you really give away all this advice? I have found the more generous we are with you, the more successful you are, you get to a point where you go, there's not enough hours in the day. I need somebody to help me. Hey, those nerdy guys that I listen to every week, they seem like they could probably help me out. And that's how this thing works. So tell your friends, tell your family, Money Guy is where we are on trying to reach you on fulfilling your goals. We'll talk to you in 2 weeks. I'm your host, Brian Preston.